It was a face that told a story, but not the one you'd expect. This face was a mask, a creation born from desperation and immense wealth. When Brazilian federal police stormed a luxury apartment in São Paulo, they were looking for a ghost. A man known as Chupeta, or Lollipop, a notorious Colombian drug lord responsible for flooding the United States with mountains of cocaine. They had photos, old ones, of a man with distinct features, a strong jawline, a prominent chin. But the man they found in that apartment, he was someone else entirely, or was he? His face was a grotesque landscape of surgical ambition, a chilling testament to how far a man would go to disappear. The man's jaw had been shaved down, his cheekbones implanted, his eyes widened. His chin, once a defining feature, was now a soft, almost feminine curve. He looked melted, distorted. A Picasso painting brought to life in the most unsettling way. He had spent a fortune not on luxury cars or private jets, but on erasing himself. He had paid surgeons to peel away his identity layer by layer until the man in the mirror was a stranger. This wasn't just hiding. This was a complete and utter transformation, a rebirth into a life of anonymity. But the past has a funny way of catching up, no matter how much you try to change your face. The officers on that raid were stunned. They held up the old photographs, comparing them to the man standing before them. It was like trying to match a shadow to a sunbeam. The eyes, maybe? There was a flicker of something familiar in the eyes. But everything else was a lie. A carefully constructed, surgically implanted lie. This was the ultimate disguise, one that went far beyond a fake mustache or a different haircut. This was a man who had declared war on his own identity, sacrificing his very face in the name of freedom. A freedom bought with billions of dollars made from poison and death. His name was Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia, and his story is a chilling journey into the heart of darkness. It's a tale of immense power, unimaginable violence, and a desperate, obsessive quest to outrun the law. He was a kingpin, a billionaire, a phantom who commanded a global empire of narcotics. But in the end, his most shocking creation was not his drug network, but the very face he wore. It was a mask that hid a monster, and it was a mask that would ultimately be his undoing, revealing the hollow truth that you can change your appearance, but you can never, ever escape who you truly are. The story begins not in a surgeon's office, but in the sun-drenched streets of Palmyra, Colombia. Long before he was known as Chupeta, Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia was just a young man with a sharp mind and an eye for opportunity. He came from a respectable family, even earning a degree in economics. He seemed destined for a legitimate life, perhaps in business or finance. But in the Colombia of the 1980s, another kind of business was booming. It was a business that promised wealth beyond imagination, a business that operated in the shadows and was built on a simple white powder cocaine. The allure was too strong to resist. He didn't start at the top. No one ever does. He began his career in the drug trade by learning the ropes, understanding the logistics of moving product from the remote jungles to the bustling cities of North America. He was smart, meticulous, and he quickly grasped the intricate dance of supply chains, money laundering, and of course enforcement. While others relied on brute force alone, Ramirez Abadia used his economic training. He treated the drug trade not as a street hustle but as a multinational corporation. He analyzed profit margins, diversified his shipping routes, and managed his assets with the precision of a Wall Street tycoon. His ambition set him apart. He wasn't content to be a mid-level manager in someone else's organization. He saw the bigger picture. He saw the fortunes being made by the legendary godfathers of the Medellin and Cali cartels. He watched them, he learned from them, and he quietly planned his own ascent. He understood that loyalty was a currency, but that fear was a far more reliable investment. He started to build his own network, forging alliances with key players, from the coca farmers in the mountains to the corrupt officials who could look the other way for the right price. His reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless began to grow. This was the foundation of his empire. It was built not just on bricks of cocaine, but on a sophisticated understanding of global economics and human weakness. He was a new breed of trafficker, one who could navigate a spreadsheet as easily as he could a back-alley deal. His rise was quiet, almost invisible at first. He was the man behind the curtain, the architect of a system that was becoming more efficient, more profitable, and more dangerous with each passing day. The young man from Palmyra was on his way, and the world had no idea of the storm that was about to break. In the intricate world of the Colombian drug trade, the Cali cartel was considered the aristocracy. while their rivals in Medellin, led by the infamous Pablo Escobar, waged a bloody public war against the state, the Cali godfathers preferred a quieter approach. They were known as the gentlemen of Cali. They invested in legitimate businesses, they moved in high society, and they ran their cocaine empire with the subtle efficiency of a Fortune 500 company. It was into this sophisticated machine that Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia truly came into his own. He was a perfect fit, and his star rose quickly. He became one of the cartel's most trusted and effective leaders. His role was crucial. He managed the vast and complex logistics of smuggling cocaine into the United States, particularly through Mexico. He pioneered new routes, new methods of concealment, and new ways to launder the tidal wave of cash that flowed back south. He was a master of disguise, not yet for his face but for his product. Cocaine was hidden in everything from hollowed-out lumber to frozen broccoli, all orchestrated under his watchful eye. He was a logistical genius, turning the art of smuggling into a science and making himself and the Cali leadership astronomically wealthy in the process. The numbers were staggering. At his peak within the Cali cartel, Ramirez Abadia was responsible for shipping dozens of tons of cocaine into the United States each year. Law enforcement estimated that he personally accumulated a fortune that soared into the billions. He wasn't just a trafficker, he was a kingmaker, a power broker whose influence stretched across continents. But with great power in the underworld comes great violence. The gentlemen of Cali may have preferred subtlety, but they were not afraid to eliminate their enemies. Ramirez Abadia was implicated in countless murders, the dark underbelly of his corporate-style operation. His success, however, painted a target on his back. As the Cali cartel's leaders were captured or killed one by one in the mid-1990s, a power vacuum emerged. Ramirez Abadia, ever the strategist, saw this not as a crisis, but as an opportunity. He had the money, the connections, and the ruthless ambition to step into the void. He had been the golden boy, the brilliant subordinate. Now it was his turn to be king. The era of the Cali cartel was ending, but for Ramirez Abadia, the real reign of terror was just about to begin. With the old guard of the Cali cartel dismantled, a new and even more violent organization rose from its ashes, the North Valley Cartel, or Norte del Valle, and Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia was one of its undisputed kings. This was not his father's cartel. The North Valley Cartel was fragmented, vicious, and constantly at war with itself. The gentlemanly facade was stripped away, replaced by open brutality. Ramirez Abadia, now operating with near total autonomy, escalated his operations to an unprecedented scale. He was no longer just a manager. He was the CEO of a global narcotics enterprise. His organization was a marvel of criminal efficiency. He controlled every single step of the process. He had his own labs, his own fleet of airplanes, his own speedboats, and even his own submarines to move his product. He was responsible for up to 80% of the cocaine being smuggled into the United States at one point, a truly mind-boggling figure. His wealth grew to almost unimaginable levels, estimated to be nearly $2 billion. He laundered this river of money through a labyrinth of front companies, real estate, and offshore accounts, a financial empire as complex as his drug routes. He was at the absolute pinnacle of his power. But this empire was built on a foundation of blood. To protect his interests, Ramirez Abadia allegedly ordered hundreds of murders. Rivals, informants, law enforcement officers, and anyone who dared to cross him were ruthlessly eliminated. His organization operated a team of sicarios, or hitmen, who carried out his orders without question. One of the most infamous incidents linked to him was the massacre in a town square where gunmen opened fire indiscriminately, a chilling message to his enemies. The man with the economics degree had become one of the most feared and violent criminals on the planet. The United States government took notice. The DEA and the Department of Justice placed him at the very top of their most wanted list. They called him one of the most powerful and elusive drug traffickers of his generation. A massive indictment was unsealed, charging him with drug trafficking, money laundering, and racketeering. The pressure was mounting. The world was closing in. Ramirez Abadia knew that his old life, the life of a visible kingpin, was over. He had the money and the power, but he was a wanted man. He needed a way to disappear, and he would soon embark on the most audacious chapter of his criminal career.
Perfect.
As the international manhunt intensified, Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia made a fateful decision. He would not surrender. He would not be captured. He would become a ghost. He had billions of dollars at his disposal, and he began to use that money not to expand his empire but to erase his own existence. The first step was to fake his death, a classic move for a cornered kingpin, but he knew that wouldn't be enough. The authorities were relentless, so he devised a more radical plan, a plan that would attack the most fundamental tool used to identify him, his own face. He decided to literally carve away his identity. He embarked on a shocking journey of surgical transformation. Over several years, he underwent at least 4 major plastic surgeries. Each procedure was designed to alter a key feature. He had his jawbone reshaped, shaving it down to soften his distinctive masculine jawline. He received implants in his cheeks to change the entire structure of his face. His chin was narrowed, his eyes were altered, his ears were tucked. Every recognizable feature was systematically dismantled and rebuilt into something new. He was a man deconstructing himself, piece by piece, paying surgeons in Brazil and Argentina exorbitant sums to make him unrecognizable. The result was horrifying. The man who emerged from these procedures was a grotesque caricature. His face was puffy, distorted, and unnatural. He looked less like a different person and more like a poorly made wax figure of his former self. The surgeries had been too aggressive, the changes too extreme. He had successfully erased the old Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia, but the new face was a chilling mask that drew its own kind of attention. It was the face of a man desperately, pathologically trying to hide. It was a disfigurement he had purchased willingly, the ultimate price for anonymity. He didn't stop with his face. He also had his fingerprints altered, burning the tips of his fingers with acid to destroy the unique ridges and whorls. He was building a new person from the ground up, a phantom with no face and no prints. He adopted new aliases, created new backstories, and moved between luxury hideouts in Brazil, living as a wealthy but reclusive businessman. He had become the architect of his own deception, a man who had sacrificed his own image in a desperate gamble to stay one step ahead of the law. But every ghost leaves a trail. For years, the plan seemed to work. Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia vanished. Law enforcement agencies around the world had his old photo, his old fingerprints, his old name, but that man no longer existed. He was living quietly, if strangely, in Brazil, managing the remnants of his empire from the shadows. He communicated with his lieutenants through encrypted devices, a ghost in the machine still pulling the strings of a multi-billion-dollar drug enterprise. He was a phantom, shielded by his new face and the immense fortune he used to bribe, corrupt, and intimidate anyone who might get too close. The challenge for investigators was immense. How do you hunt a man who doesn't look like himself? Traditional police work, like showing photos to informants or witnesses, was useless. The man they were looking for was, for all intents and purposes, gone. They were chasing a memory. The DEA and Colombian authorities had to get creative. They knew he couldn't run his empire without communicating, so they shifted their focus from finding his face to finding his voice. The key, they realized, was to intercept his communications. They began a painstaking process of electronic surveillance, listening to thousands of hours of phone calls. The breakthrough came from technology. Investigators had old recordings of Ramirez Abadia's voice from previous wiretaps. They used sophisticated voice recognition software to analyze the unique patterns, cadence, and pitch of his speech. It was like a vocal fingerprint. They began feeding every suspicious, high-level encrypted call they intercepted into this system, hoping for a match. It was a search for a needle in a global haystack. For months, they listened, they analyzed, and they waited. They were hunting his voice, the one thing he couldn't change with a surgeon's scalpel. And then, they got a hit. A voice on a call from Brazil matched the vocal signature of Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia. The ghost had spoken. The wiretaps led them to a network of individuals in Sao Paulo, and slowly, painstakingly, they began to close the net. They tracked his money, his associates, and his movements, all without knowing what he looked like. They followed the digital breadcrumbs he left behind, tracing the phantom back to his lair. The hunt was on, and the man with the new face had no idea that the walls were finally, irrevocably closing in around him. The final act began with a massive, coordinated police operation in Brazil, codenamed Operation Harpy. After months of painstaking surveillance guided by the voice recognition match, Brazilian federal police, working closely with the DEA, had pinpointed their target's location. They had traced the ghost to a luxurious high-security apartment in a wealthy suburb of Sao Paulo. They still didn't have a current photograph. They were going in blind, relying on the intelligence that the world's most wanted drug lord was inside. The element of surprise was everything. They had to move fast, before the phantom could slip away again. In the pre-dawn hours of August 7, 2007, heavily armed police commandos stormed the building. They burst into the apartment finding a man and a woman. The man was not the one from the wanted posters. His face was a bizarre landscape of surgical alterations. He was puffy, his features distorted, almost alien. For a moment there was confusion. Was this their man, or just another wealthy eccentric? But the intelligence was solid. They knew Chupeta had undergone extensive surgery. This had to be him. The man, seeing the armed officers, knew the game was over. The proof came when they searched the apartment. It was a treasure trove of evidence. They found stacks of cash, dollars, euros, and Brazilian reais, totaling over $1 million. They discovered offshore bank account records, ledgers detailing drug shipments, and encrypted communication devices. It was the nerve center of a global criminal empire hidden in plain sight. And then they found the final, irrefutable proof. Despite his efforts to erase his identity, he had kept something from his past. Investigators found old photos of the face he had worked so hard to destroy, connecting the phantom in the apartment to the Kingpin on the wanted posters. The arrest was a global sensation. The world was shocked not just by the capture of such a notorious trafficker, but by his appearance. The side-by-side photos were broadcast everywhere. The handsome, confident drug lord of the 1990s, next to the disfigured, defeated man in handcuffs. His face became a symbol of the desperate, dark lengths a criminal would go to in order to evade justice. He had spent millions to become invisible, but in the end, his monstrous new face made him more infamous than ever. The unraveling was complete. The ghost was finally caught. Once in custody, the full weight of the law came down on Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia. His capture was a monumental victory for international law enforcement, a testament to the power of cross-border cooperation and advanced technology. The man who had once commanded a fleet of submarines and airplanes was now just another prisoner in a Brazilian jail cell. His immense fortune, scattered across the globe in a complex web of accounts and assets, began to be seized. The empire he had built over 2 decades started to crumble, its foundations exposed for all to see. The legal process moved swiftly. The United States had long sought his extradition, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was wanted for leading a continuing criminal enterprise, for importing tons of cocaine into America, and for a slew of murder and racketeering charges. In 2008, after a year in Brazilian custody, he was extradited to the United States to face the justice he had so desperately tried to outrun. He arrived in New York, his bizarre, surgically altered face a stark contrast to the grim reality of the American federal prison system. The Kingpin had finally been brought to the land he had poisoned with his product. Facing the prospect of spending the rest of his life behind bars with no possibility of parole, Ramirez Abadia did what many powerful criminals do when backed into a corner. He made a deal. He agreed to cooperate with U.S. prosecutors. He began to sing, providing invaluable information about the inner workings of the Norte del Valle Cartel, detailing smuggling routes, money laundering schemes, and the identities of other high-level traffickers. He even testified against his former associates, his distorted face on the witness stand, a surreal spectacle of the underworld turning on itself. His cooperation helped dismantle the very organization he had helped create. In 2011 he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a significantly reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. The judge acknowledged the immense scale of his crimes but also the value of his testimony in bringing other major criminals to justice. The face of justice in this case was complex. The man responsible for so much death and destruction had traded his secrets for a fraction of the punishment he deserved. His story serves as a chilling reminder that while justice may be slow and sometimes imperfect, it is ultimately inescapable, no matter how much you pay to change your face. The story of Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia is more than just a true crime tale. It's a profound parable about identity, greed, and the ultimate futility of trying to escape one's own shadow. He reached the zenith of the criminal world, amassing a fortune that could buy anything, including, he thought, a new life. He commanded armies of men and fleets of vehicles, moving mountains of cocaine across the globe with terrifying efficiency. He was a master of logistics, a ruthless enforcer, and for a time he was untouchable. But his legacy is not one of power or wealth, it is a legacy of destruction. His primary legacy is the devastation wrought by the drug trade. The countless lives lost to addiction in North America, the communities torn apart by violence in Colombia, the corruption that rotted institutions from the inside out, all were fueled by his insatiable ambition. He was a key architect of this misery, a man who viewed human lives as mere entries on a balance sheet. The billions he earned were drenched in the blood of his victims and the tears of their families. This is the dark, indelible stain that no amount of time or cooperation can ever wash away. And then there is the legacy of his face. It stands as one of the most bizarre and compelling symbols in the history of crime. It represents the ultimate act of self-erasure, a desperate gambit born of paranoia and hubris. His disfigured appearance is a physical manifestation of his corrupted soul, a grotesque mask that failed to hide the monster beneath. It serves as a haunting lesson. You can alter your features, burn your fingerprints, and adopt a new name, but you cannot surgically remove your past. The deeds of the old face will always haunt the new one. In the end, Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia, the man known as Chupeta, became a prisoner of his own creation. He is locked away not only in a federal prison but within the strange, distorted face he chose for himself. His story is a chilling journey into a world where reality is twisted by power and money, a world where a man would rather disfigure himself than face the consequences of his actions. It is a stark reminder that true escape is impossible, and that a legacy, whether of honor or of infamy, is etched far deeper than the skin.